On a dark, stormy night, Link, making his return voyage to Hyrule, struggles to resist against the strong winds and waves, until suddenly... Later on a faraway island, a young woman walking the beach discovers an unconscious Link, and decides to take him in. To begin, I want to tell you guys a story. Back in elementary school, whenever it rained outside, my class would have indoor recess. In the back of the classroom, there were a set of computers, and sometimes kids would download a bunch of emulators. And when I managed to get a computer, one game I always played was Link's Awakening. I played Zelda 1 and A Link to the Past, but Link's Awakening was always the one I returned to. To remember why, it was definitely the opening cinematic, and loving the charm of Link's Awakening. This is around 2010, and I already had 3 Zelda games under my belt, while closely following Skyward Sword, constantly rewatching the demo they showed. You know, the demo where in the middle of Miyamoto playing, the controller stopped working? Link's Awakening always left the strongest impression on me, and one of my goals for this video was to find out why. Originally released in 1993 for the Game Boy, The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening would be the Zelda series' first handheld adventure. What you just saw is the opening to Link's Awakening DX, the enhanced Game Boy Color version released in 1998. And just to state the obvious first, for this video I will be playing this version, not only because of the added color helping the video pop, and alongside the new content. The DX version has seen the most re-releases, and was used as a foundation for the Switch remake. I'll quickly go over this version as well. But Link's Awakening was remade from the ground up in collaboration with Grezzo, who previously developed the 3DS remakes of Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask, so it wasn't their first rodeo with the Zelda series. To be honest, I think the remake deserves its own separate video, but not right now. Probably a one-off I'll do in the future. It's the most convenient version you can get right now, but Link's Awakening is available on the expansion pass. The DX version is widely considered the definitive version of Link's Awakening, and one you should actively attempt to play. Don't view that as shade to the Game Boy version, instead see this video as a do review of both versions, because they both play the exact same. They have the same story, dungeons, and gameplay. Only one has color and an extra dungeon, and that's about it. The Japanese box art once again continues the tradition of displaying beautiful artwork. Meanwhile, the international box has a more basic aesthetic. Mind you, there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, I like the international box art for Link's Awakening. It does a good job setting your expectations for what to expect. And the DX version emphasizes the color dungeon for the North American version. Then you have the European version that's like... It's funny how nowadays Western publishers are obsessed with battle passes and microtransactions, while Eastern publishers love releasing definitive versions of their games with bonus content at full price. It's a lesser of two evils scenario, but I wanted to mention it given I'm playing the definitive version of Link's Awakening. With that being said, let's begin The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening. The story of Link's Awakening begins rather humbly. In 1989, the Game Boy released pioneering handheld consoles and became a commercial success. After the Japanese release of A Link to the Past in 1991, Takashi Tezuka pitched the Zelda title for the Game Boy, originally intended to be a port of A Link to the Past, but later evolved into a separate game. This is thanks to the efforts of Kazuaki Morita, a programmer who created a Zelda-like game with an early Game Boy development kit, showing that a Zelda game could be made for the handheld. All the previous development staff returned for Link's Awakening. However, I want to give special attention to Keisuke Tanaba and Yoshiaki Koizumi. This is because in Link's Awakening, they served a much larger role during development. Tanabe would create the basis of the story, making it a spin-off that ignores elements found in the previous games, omitting characters like Princess Zelda, the Triforce, and the setting of Hyrule. I think for a game that for all intents and purposes was meant to be a spin-off on a handheld, a smaller scoped adventure made sense for the Game Boy, allowing the developers to experiment with the story because they weren't burdened by the previous games. And given how complicated Zelda's timeline got, Link's Awakening ignores all that and tells a one-off story. Now I said that Tanabe wrote the basic premise of the story, and that's true. It would be Yoshiaki Koizumi who created the main story, such as the setting of Koholint and the people who resided on the island. We'll see later on, but Link's Awakening has one of the strangest and charming settings in the entire series. You could honestly drop The Legend of Zelda in the title, and I guarantee you Link's Awakening would still be a successful game. Development lasted a year and a half, and Link's Awakening would release internationally in 1993. That was the story of the Game Boy version, but what about the DX version, the one I'll be playing for this video? Well, there's nothing much to talk about regarding the DX port. It was headed by a smaller team with Tezuka serving as a supervisor. He looked at the game and said, "Yep, Link wears green. Good job, guys." I should also mention that an HD version of Link's Awakening exists, developed by a guy simply known as Link's Awakening DX HD. From what I've researched, it adds HD visuals, 120 FPS, and widescreen support. If you want to play a version that looks like the original while playing like the Switch version, definitely check this version out if you're not ashamed of playing fan games. Of course, like they've done before, Nintendo had the game taken down, but a quick Google search will point you in the right direction. With Link's Awakening being a spin-off, it wastes no time setting up the plot. Upon booting up the game, you're shown the introductory cutscene I explained in the opening. The opening does an excellent job at instantly hooking the player with Link caught in the middle of a storm. In the Switch remake, it begins with an animated cutscene, once again doing a great job in introducing Link's Awakening to a new generation. As Link struggles against the storm, his ship is struck by lightning and the screen goes to white. We're next shown a girl walking the beach, discovering an unconscious Link. Then the screen shifts upwards, revealing a giant egg atop the mountain and the game's title. Unlike A Link to the Past, where the opening was spent explaining the lore behind the game, Link's Awakening from the beginning shows that this is a self-contained story. Link isn't trying to defeat Ganon and save Princess Zelda. He's stranded on an unknown island and needs to return home. Upon awakening, Link discovers he's in the house of the woman who saved him. The woman named Marin explains to Link that he is in the island of Koholint, and that he should follow the path south to the beach. Marin is a newcomer introduced in Link's Awakening, a young woman with red hair and an incredible singing ability. Much like Link and Zelda, Marin has seen multiple incarnations throughout the series alongside her father Terran. In Link's Awakening, she basically serves the role of Zelda, so in other words, she's Zelda with red hair. Before heading to the beach, you have to speak to Terran because he'll return your shield, and you know it's yours because it's got your name on it. Once you step out onto Koholint Island, you'll know you're not in Hyrule anymore. Exploring May Village, you're introduced to the townsfolk, and talking to some of them can help you learn important tutorials or meet the interesting characters that reside on Koholint. Link's Awakening is once again styled similarly to Zelda 1 and A Link to the Past. You're on a screen and you travel to the edge to transition to the next. In terms of how they're structured, Link's Awakening takes many cues from Zelda 1. Each screen contains challenges and obstacles the player will have to overcome. However, Link's Awakening also borrows heavily from A Link to the Past, taking the level of detail that game utilized to design the overworld. Even with the hardware limitations of the Game Boy, Link's Awakening does an excellent job designing the overworld to give you the right amount of information at a given time, which according to Tezuka was an intentional design decision made by the developers. On your way to the beach, there are sea urchins blocking your path. Taking your shield, you manage to move them out of the way, and walking down a screen you discover your sword. As you approach, suddenly, a mysterious owl appears, exclaiming that Link is the courageous young lad who will wake the windfish. If Link thinks to return home, then he must take his sword and head north into the forest where more will be explained there. Grabbing his sword, Link is now ready to set off on his new adventure. Link once again controls the same way he did in A Link to the Past. He can move in 8 directions, jump off a cliff, and swing his sword. However, Link's Awakening makes major changes that set it apart from the previous games. New to Link's Awakening is the Piece of Power and Guardian Acorn, a power-up that when dropped by an enemy will temporarily boost Link's attack or defense. They're always useful when acquired. My only problem is I think their themes are really repetitive. Though it is great to see enemies being launched with the Piece of Power. With the Game Boy having 2 buttons, we've returned to the inventory system of Zelda 1. Where the changes begin is that items can be freely equipped to the A and B button. Even though items have always been a cornerstone of Zelda's gameplay, Link's Awakening has them take on a more prominent role. The sword, for example, can be unequipped so that way another item can take its place. There will be moments when in order to solve a puzzle or overcome an obstacle, you'll have to combine different items. Criticism you'll often hear, and one I agree with, is that it can slow down gameplay. The reason I bring this up now is because in Zelda 1 and A Link to the Past, items either gave active or passive abilities. The boomerang was never necessary to solve puzzles. It's a weapon that stuns enemies, making them vulnerable to attack, or a better example is the Power Gloves, that when equipped, passively amplify Link's strength. Link's Awakening does have the Power Bracelet, however, in order to use it, you'd have to equip it to one of the buttons. If you don't, and approach a pot, you'll hear, "Wow, this looks pretty heavy. You won't be able to lift it with just your bare hands." That gets really annoying when you do it by accident. I'll at least say being able to customize both buttons has its ups because it allows the player to tackle any obstacles their way. On top of that, Link's Awakening has some damn good level design. Once you acquire the sword, your next destination is the mysterious forest north of May Village. On your way, you can also get a couple of heart containers and a new collectible, the secret seashells. Just to make this point right now, I hate collectibles in this series. Heart containers, love them. Seashells or gold scatulas, no thanks. I know they're optional, but when I get that completionist itch, I know I have to get all of them. It's a force of habit. Either way, entering the forest, you'll meet the owl again, telling you to obtain a key hidden in the forest. Here we learn the owl's purpose is to be our guide, telling us what to do next and give exposition. I think it works in the context of Link's Awakening, because from a gameplay perspective, it prevents you from getting lost, and story-wise, the owl helps Link and the player learn more about Koholint Island. The way Link's Awakening is structured, it uses a sort of episodic system when telling its story. What that means is that to enter the next dungeon, you'll have to find a required item or need to overcome an obstacle blocking your way. If you try to leave the woods, you'll discover a raccoon has laid a curse on the forest, and outside there are pits you're unable to get across. The only way forward is to find a mushroom, talk to Syrup, that way she can make it into magic powder, use it on the raccoon revealed to be Terran, who I guess had a bad trip, and then obtain the key to enter the first dungeon, because as we'll find out later, Link must obtain the 8 musical instruments in order to awaken the Windfish. To get sidetracked, the next point I want to talk about is the sheer amount of charm in Link's Awakening. I think one of the reasons why my younger self loved coming back to Link's Awakening so much was because I was drawn to the setting of Koholint Island. That's because Link's Awakening has one of the most memorable settings in the entire Zelda series. A lot of it has to do with the incredible sprite work done for this game. The DX version's added detail to the characters and overworld gives Link's Awakening a timeless aesthetic. The 8-bit sprite for Link is a great evolution from his Zelda 1 sprite, and others like Marin and the Owl are great as well, which was the motivation behind the thumbnail for this video. From an artistic perspective, Link's Awakening has one of the most memorable settings in the entire Zelda series. Part of it has to do with the many landmarks and locations Koholint Island houses. The DX version gives so much life to the island alongside Link's Awakening soundtrack. Some of my favorite landmarks include the waterfall, because I love how it holds the entrance to Angler's Tunnel, the mysterious forest for teaching you the importance of exploring and solving puzzles, Tall Heights just for the music alone, and housing Koholint Island's landmark, the Windfish's egg. Koholint itself houses so many unique characters and locations that it sits with you even after beating the game. If you take the time to speak to the residents of Mabe Village, you'll find out that their dialogue contains so much charm within them, like these kids playing outside the library, teaching you important tutorials. How do they know this? I don't know, I'm just a kid. Across Koholint, you'll come across these houses with a telephone logo. At any point, you can enter them and speak to Mr. Ulrira, who will give hints on where to go next. And you can speak to him back in Mabe Village, however, if you speak to him in person, you'll find that he's rather shy. But if you do the photo side quest, you'll discover that Mr. Ulrira is very lively when by himself, like a true introvert. Speaking of which, the photo guy is one of my favorite characters in this game. You can start his quest once you gain access to the swamp. At certain moments throughout the game, he'll stop you to take a photo. Each photo is unique, and some of these are pretty funny to say the least. Sometimes they're innocent like Link and Marin at the beach, or comedic like the photo guy falling off a bridge. For this one, I have no idea why he's at the bottom of a well, but it's pretty hilarious he took a photo right when Marin lands on top of Link. I always do his side quests on repeated playthroughs, and it's a shame it was removed from the Switch version. Of course, part of Link's Awakening's charm is its love of Easter eggs. There are the obvious Mario ones like Goombas and Piranha Plants, and in the case of Eagle's Tower you'll all of a sudden run into Kirby. A major one being Bow Wow, a pet chain chomp owned by Madame Meow Meow. I don't know how she managed to domesticate a chain chomp, but when you turn from the first dungeon, you'll find out he's been stolen. Once you track down Bow Wow's location, you have to defeat the gang of moblins that took him, and once you free him, he acts as a second companion, able to eat enemies because in order to enter the second dungeon, you're going to need Bow Wow to eat the large plants blocking the entrance. And after you complete the dungeon, you take Bow Wow on a return walk to his owner. I think what's so funny about this entire section is seeing Link walk around with a chain chomp. There's also the training sequence that in order to begin, you have to win the Yoshi doll from the Crane game. Finally, there's the character of Terran, who's meant to be a surrogate for Mario. Terran always ends up in the strangest scenarios, like when he eats a mushroom turning into a raccoon, or when he uses a stick to knock over a beehive, which turns out the way you expected. It's incredible to think that even though Link's Awakening was considered to be a spin-off, so much love and passion went into the creation of this game. A lot of that has to do with Link's Awakening being unrestricted when it came to its setting and characters. I think a major contribution to that is Link's Awakening being on the Game Boy. Even with the hardware limitations, Link's Awakening fits perfectly for the handheld it was designed for, and I'm glad we got the DX version to make this game even better. Even though Link's Awakening borrows heavily from the examples set in A Link to the Past, Link's Awakening makes several improvements that I believe make the dungeons even better, like giving every dungeon a unique theme. The dungeons have become more non-linear, incentivizing the player to see the dungeon once again from a big picture perspective, and making the key item more involved in the level design. I said this previously, but Link's Awakening does an excellent job of giving the player the right amount of information needed at a given moment. There will be instances you'll be unable to explore further, or have a chest be unavailable until later. In Bottle Grotto and Key Cavern, both dungeons will place chests in the beginning out of your reach, and once you obtain the item, you can backtrack to open the chests. I really like it when 2D Zelda applies this design mentality because it splits the dungeons into two parts. The first half is you without the item, and the second half is the item opening up the dungeon. We'll use the first dungeon, Tail Cave, as an example. To even begin the dungeon, you first have to acquire the key to enter the dungeon, something you'll be doing a lot in Link's Awakening. In Tail Cave, upon beginning, you can quickly explore the dungeon to obtain the new and improved compass and 3 keys. There are 2 paths leading to the center room, after which Tail Cave becomes more linear, restricting you to these areas. You can take a detour to get the Owl Beak, but the only place to go is acquiring the Roc's Feather, which is done by taking the long way around this room, solving a simple block puzzle, and going through Link's Awakening's new 2D sections. This is what I meant by in my Zelda 2 video. Having these small sections is a great way of creating variety in the level design. It harkens back to the 2D sections from Zelda 1 as a way of explaining how Link travels between areas, because as we'll find out, it leads to the Roc's Feather. Now with the dungeon item in hand, Part 2 begins with the entire dungeon becoming explorable, allowing you to obtain the Nightmare Key and head to the boss. However, unlike A Link to the Past, where once you get the item, it was a linear path to the boss, Link's Awakening introduces mini-bosses, and some of them require you to use the dungeon item in order to counter their moves. In the case of Tail Cave, you have to jump over these rolling spikes and whack the boss with your sword enough times. Every boss will drop a fairy and unlock a teleporter that warps you to the dungeon's entrance. A great feature in case you have to grab a chest you missed, or one that was previously inaccessible. By this point, you know what you have to do. Once you arrive at the boss, find its weakness and use it to defeat them. Unfortunately, it's Moldorm once again, and he's just as annoying as last time. But he'll go down eventually, and you'll obtain the first instrument. As far as tutorial dungeons go, Tail Cave is an excellent first dungeon. Dare I say, better than the Eastern Palace. In every Zelda game, the first dungeon is meant to set the standard for the rest of the dungeons. For Tail Cave, it perfectly blends linear progression and non-linear exploration. Link's Awakening, when you really think about it, took all the lessons learned from the previous games, like the themes of Zelda 1, the 2D sections of Zelda 2, and the exploration of A Link to the Past, to blend it into some of the best designed dungeons in the series. It's not perfect, mind you. In Tail Cave, you'll need bombs to crack open this wall, however by this point bombs are unavailable, meaning you'll need to return later. To play devil's advocate, inside the cracked wall is a secret seashell, which is optional, so the choice is left up to you. As for the other 3 dungeons, they all once again do a great job creating unique challenges for the player to solve. I really like how in the later dungeons the center room will have these platforms, giving the player a higher perspective over the areas. Like how in Key Cavern, the only way to know about this bombable wall is to view it from the center platform. The reason I bring this up is because by Catfish's Maw, the dungeons do begin to increase in difficulty. To get the Angler's Tunnel, the owl will tell you to go to the desert. On your way there, you'll enter Animal Village and discover a walrus is blocking your path. And by talking to the villagers, they'll tell you to bring Marin as her sinking can wake the walrus. Returning to Maeve Village, which is made easier thanks to the teleporter, you find Marin at the beach where she and Link sit down for a while. This moment, and another one we'll see later, is how I came to understand why Link's Awakening is a special game. When you speak to Marin, she asks Link to sit with her for a while. The scene then transitions into a cutscene with Link and Marin staring out into the ocean, Marin pondering to herself where the coconut trees come from and what lies beyond the sea. She then confesses that, when she discovered Link, she was beyond overjoyed, believing Link was a messenger sent to Koholint. While staring at the seagulls, Marin admits that she would fly beyond the horizon to distant lands and sing to countless people, and desires to make her wish known to the windfish. Music is a common theme within Link's Awakening. Obviously there's the instruments of the sirens, the main reason we venture into the dungeon, but it's precisely shown through Ballad of the Windfish, as you'll be hearing this song and its remixes throughout the entire game. It's become synonymous with Link's Awakening, and has become my second favorite Zelda song. Link's Awakening marked the first time Link can learn multiple songs for the ocarina. There are a total of 3 songs, and each have their own uses. It's a very Zelda concept having songs be played in order to cast magic spells, a favorite trope of mine within this series. 3 composers worked on this game's soundtrack, as Koji Kondo served in a supervisor role, and I'm glad to say Link's Awakening has my favorite soundtrack in the entire series. This section when Link and Marin journey together to Animal Village is one of my favorite moments in this game. Typically in previous Zelda games, there was never a moment where the characters took a second to stop and talk to one another. In A Link to the Past, when Link and Zelda spoke to each other, it was always about giving the player the necessary information they needed at the moment. In Link's Awakening, Link and Marin take the time to talk to each other. Well, mainly Marin, but you get what I'm saying. There are also certain moments you could only get when Marin is with you, and these little moments are adorable. Link's Awakening, when you really think about it, is the first Zelda game with a proper story. It takes the time to invest in character dialogue, and that's thanks to Koizumi, who wrote the main story and dialogue. Link's Awakening, in terms of its structure, is very linear in how you progress through the game. From Tail Cave to Turtle Rock, you'll be going in the order the game wants you to head in. And mind you, I don't think that's a bad thing. It solves a problem that could have arisen in the previous games, where the player could be left unsure of their destination. 5 out of the 8 total dungeons will require you to obtain a key in order to unlock the entrance. However, the way to get to each key will be different. To enter Key Cavern, you first have to speak to a character named Richard. He explains that he lost his 5 golden leaves, and asks Link to head to his castle to retrieve what he lost, in exchange for him opening the path to the key. Link's Awakening was the first instance when the Zelda formula began to mature into a more linear-styled format. However, that doesn't mean there's still room for interpretation. Link's Awakening introduces the trading sequence, a side quest involving you acquiring an item from an NPC to then trade it to another NPC in exchange for another item, etc., etc. I say side quest, but in Link's Awakening, The trading sequence is mandatory up until a certain point. To cross the water to enter the castle, by this point you should have the bananas to bribe the monkeys into making the bridge. However, some players who ignored it up until this point could be confused since they would have no idea how to acquire bananas. In any RPG, one of the first things you should do upon arriving at a new location is speak to the NPCs because some of them will give you important clues, and Link's Awakening gives you Mr. Allura, who will give you hints for free. The trading sequence isn't even that hard if you ask me. The game will only make certain sections available to you once you've reached that far. You never have to worry about giving the wrong item to the wrong character, making the questline very straightforward. The challenge arrives from giving the proper item to the right character. There are some pretty funny moments from this questline. It's very charming when the game plays the item get song and they hold it in the air. When you get the love letter from Christine, you're supposed to take it to Mr. Wright, and after reading it, he discovers it came attached with a picture, and upon looking at it, you realize bro's getting catfished. After getting the mermaid scale and placing it on the statue, you get the final item, the magnifying lens, and if you backtrack to the beach and bomb this cave, it'll reveal a character that was previously invisible. It'll then reward you with the boomerang at the cost of trading in one of your items. I chose the shovel because by this point, it's outlived its usefulness. It might suck on the surface, but let me tell you something, the boomerang is OP as hell in this game. It can basically one-shot enemies, and I'm pretty sure it's more powerful than the level 2 sword. So in other words, always go out of your way to complete the trading sequence. Now it's time for my favorite part of my Zelda videos, my graphs. I figured that now would be a good time to mention this, but in Link's Awakening, because the game is much more linear than the previous games, Link's Awakening handles its exploration similarly to Zelda 1, meaning that when you acquire a new item, you can use it to acquire a heart container or seashell that was previously inaccessible. However, I think Link's Awakening handles this system in a more well-designed and streamlined fashion. Now when it comes to collectibles in this series, you'll get a mix of opinions. For the sake of argument, I think the seashells are fine collectible. And the reason why is because they follow the same formula as getting heart containers. And the best part is you only need 20 out of the 26 total seashells to get the full reward. Which is why I think Link's Awakening handles collectibles the best out of every Zelda game. What Zelda has always excelled at is the ability to perfectly blend linear and non-linear gameplay. For the rest of the series, the games will lay out a specific order of events you'll follow, while at the same time allow players to obtain items at their own discretion. Remember, many of the items in this series are optional, so if you want, you can ignore every side activity and blitz through every dungeon, or you can take the time to explore every area and find secrets. So for the future Zelda games I talk about, I'll be using this graph as a reference. Since I'm playing the DX version, I want to take a moment and go over the color dungeon. Technically speaking, you can access the dungeon as soon as you gain access to the cemetery and the Pegasus boots. At Mabe Village's library, you use the Pegasus boots that knock a book off the shelf, containing a hidden code. You then have to head to the specific screen at the cemetery and push the correct gravestones to unlock the entrance. Once inside, you solve a quick puzzle with these two skeletons, and if you listen closely, you can hear a remake of Zelda 1's dungeon theme. As for the dungeon itself, if I could be honest, the dungeon isn't much to write home about. That's because it likens itself to a Zelda 1 dungeon. Except, it doesn't have any of the qualities associated with a traditional dungeon, there's no key item, so your only goal is to get to the end. This dungeon does lean heavily on the color gimmick. Some of the puzzles will have you either throw a ball into the corresponding color, or flick these switches to match one color. It's not that complicated, but I'll admit I do like these types of puzzles. The mini-boss is weak to the magic powder, but thankfully the skeletons at the entrance do warn you ahead of time. As for the main boss, all you have to do is keep hitting it until it turns red and explodes. Your reward is a choice between the red mail, permanently increasing your attack, or the blue mail, permanently increasing your defense. For my playthrough, I chose the blue mail because afterwards I received the upgraded sword, my logic being to have the best of both worlds. It's nice that for a re-release they included this dungeon. The reward is a permanent upgrade, and I like how you can begin this dungeon at any point after Key Cavern. On your way to the 6th dungeon, the owl will tell you to head to the southern face shrine to find the key. The path to get there is through a set of ruins guarded by plenty of Armos Knights, but with the bow in hand, one shot makes quick work of them. Entering the shrine, the atmosphere changes suddenly, the music is haunting, and the shrine is dark. In the next room, you confront a giant Armos Knight. Thankfully, a couple of spin attacks takes him down. Upon entering the next room, Link spots a mirror on the wall, and once he approaches it, the message reads, "To the finder, the Owl of Koholint is but an illusion. Human, monster, sea, sky, a scene on the lid of a sleeper's eye. Awake the dreamer, and Koholint will vanish, much like a needle in a bubble. Castaway, you should know the truth." It's here we discover the ugly truth. Koholint Island is a dream of the windfish. Everyone we've met up until this point is all an illusion. Marin, Mabe Village, and even the bosses are all a product of the windfish. From a storytelling perspective, this is such a fantastic twist. Up until this point, your goal was to obtain the 8 instruments, and along the way you probably barely contemplated your actions. But when you look back, you remember the bosses warning you of this exact twist. What makes it more interesting is that the residents of Koholint have no idea that they're in a dream. To them, the only life they know is on the island. The only exception to the rule is Marin, who you remember spoke of wanting to make a wish to the Windfish. It does serve as a good explanation to all the unusual things you've seen. When you exit the shrine, the owl approaches you once again, saying that despite the information learned, no one is sure if it's true. I haven't gone in depth into the owl because up until this point, his only role was to guide Link on where to go next. He often speaks in riddles and gives bite-sized information on Koholint Island. We still don't know much about him. All we know is he's a mysterious figure who appears to have a connection to the Windfish. The only way to find out is to obtain the last 3 instruments. By this point, there's nothing much left to do in Link's Awakening. There are only 3 dungeons remaining, and you should be fully equipped with whatever colored mail you've chosen and upgraded sword. I think the last 3 dungeons are fantastic, ramping up the difficulty to reflect the endgame. Phase Shrine is the 6th dungeon, and it might honestly be my favorite dungeon in the game. The fur being the theme for this dungeon. It's creepy and does a great job understanding what the player is feeling. And despite knowing the truth, we still carry on with our mission. When studying the map for this section, I realized the dungeon's layout is similar to Link's 8-bit sprite in Zelda 1. What makes this dungeon so good is that it's divided into parts like previously. Part 1 of the dungeon begins with you traveling on the western side to grab the necessary items, bombing this wall to head down the room with the upgraded power bracelet. There are some optional rupees you can obtain, and Phase Shrine introduces this puzzle where you need to have the knight's pieces facing upwards. Despite popular belief, the pieces aren't random. If you've ever played chess before, you know that knights can only move in an L direction, so as long as you keep that in mind, you'll eventually solve the puzzle. It's a shame that the dungeon's item is an upgraded power bracelet, because you only use it to lift the giant statues to open doors. Part 2 is entirely on the eastern side of the dungeon, and the only problem I have is using the switches to get a couple of the chests. Phase Shrine is unfortunately where Wizrobes make a return, and I know this game wants you to use the bow, but the bow sucks against them, taking 4 arrows instead of 1 bomb, which is more pragmatic. Bombs will be your way of defeating the boss, who's a total pushover. For the next dungeon, you'll hear a wide range of opinions. I know a lot of people who don't like Eagle's Tower, but to give a nuanced and analytical answer, I think it's a pretty good dungeon. What sets it apart from the other dungeons is that on the 2nd floor, there's a green ball you need to pick up in order to throw out 4 pillars, causing the floor to fall. That's a cool idea, and I think some people over-exaggerate the difficulty. All you have to do is bring the ball to the room with the pillar, drop to the 1st floor, and circle around to the room with the ball. As long as you stick to the edge and avoid the center room, you can quickly figure out how to destroy each pillar. And once you make it to the 3rd floor, it opens up allowing you to get the Nightmare Key. You also have to make sure you get the Mirror Shield because the shield is useful for guarding against the boss's wind attack and to get past this flamethrower. At the entrance to Turtle Rock, you use the Song of Souls to awaken a mini-boss, only to make quick work of him. Turtle Rock is a massive final dungeon, and you can easily get lost in here. However, the strategy I like to employ is to head to the left side of the dungeon and grab all the important items and keys. Then head to the right side, grab all the keys, thereby avoiding backtracking, and from there it's a linear path to the Magic Rod. All of the mini-bosses make a return in Turtle Rock, and they're all defeated the same way, except for this one where you have to throw bombs from a higher ledge. After obtaining the Magic Rod and Nightmare Key, you can circle back to the center room, melt these ice blocks, and make quick work of the boss. His last words begging Link not to awaken the Windfish, but by this point we've come too far and obtained the final instrument. With all 8 instruments in Link's possession, the final task is to venture to Mount Tamaranch where the Windfish lies asleep. On every playthrough of Link's Awakening, I always like to return to Maid Village to speak to Marin and the residents of Koholint one last time. When you speak to her, she says she made her wish to the Windfish. What it is, well, she doesn't tell you. Earlier on your way to Turtle Rock, you'll discover Marin trapped on a bridge, but thanks to the hook shot, Link is able to rescue her. During their conversation, as she's about to make a confession, Terran appears interrupting the conversation. After which, the owl then appears, realizing Marin's Ballad of the Windfish is the key to awakening the Windfish. The other reason you're here is so you can read the Secrets of Koholint book at the library to take note of its directions. After saying your goodbyes, the Windfish waits at the top of Mount Tamaranch. Upon climbing the mountain, Link takes out his ocarina and begins playing Ballad of the Windfish. As the performance continues, more of the instruments join in, eventually unlocking the entrance to the Windfish's egg. Entering the egg, Link falls down and must solve a complicated maze of repeating rooms. Here's why you needed to read that book in the library, because the code inside reveals the correct path. Once the jingle plays, you fall down the hole, beginning the final boss. That's pretty much all there is to the Windfish's egg, and I think the payoff was well worth it. Link's Awakening constantly reminds us of the Windfish's importance, and now that we're here, it feels like we've entered the Windfish's subconscious, and the instruments were our key to enter. Beginning the final boss, it's unlike anything we've seen before. Instead of Ganon, it's Nightmare, a being who invaded the Windfish's dream, and the root cause of why the Windfish is trapped inside an egg. Dreams are one of Link's Awakening's themes, and I think having the manifestation of nightmares, a common occurrence people experience when they dream, makes sense as a villain. Throughout the fight, Nightmare will transform into different enemies Link has fought, like Aghanim and Ganon. In his final phase, he'll transform into a giant eyeball, and Link's Awakening continues the tradition of needing the bow to defeat the final boss. After the final blow is dealt, Nightmare laments that the island and his world are about to disappear. A staircase then reveals itself, and once Link climbs to the top, the owl appears, revealing himself to be a spirit of the Windfish, sent to guide Link to this very moment. Link then comes face to face with the Windfish. Reminiscing his slumber, he thanks Link for all he's done, announcing the only thing left to do is to play the Song of Awakening, and as the Windfish awakens, the island of Koholint disappears. Waking up, Link, on a piece of debris, catches his bearings, reminiscing whether the Windfish, Marin, or Koholint Island were real, when suddenly a giant whale appeared high in the sky, and it was at that moment Link realized what he experienced was not a dream. As the title of the video stated, Link's Awakening is a special game. Every time the Zelda series tries something new, it always comes in swinging, and leaves you with a strong impression. Link's Awakening not only achieves its goal of bringing the Zelda series onto a handheld, it also evolved the Zelda formula, introducing concepts and ideas that laid the groundwork for Ocarina of Time. And it's incredible to realize Link's Awakening began as a spin-off. Even though I believe A Link to the Past created the gold standard for a Zelda game, I can't deny Link's Awakening demonstrated something just as good, if not better, could be built on top of that, ultimately benefiting the series as a whole. Link's Awakening ends with a sorrowful but bittersweet ending. If you complete Link's Awakening without getting a game over, Marin will reincarnate into a seagull, signifying her wish came true. Even if Koholint Island vanishes, the dream will always live on in your memories. I think that's the message Link's Awakening is trying to convey, that even after you beat the game, the memories you've created during your playthrough will always be with you, and if you ever want to revisit Koholint, all you have to do is play the game again. That's why I think Link's Awakening was chosen to be remade for the Switch, not only because it's special to many people, but it's like re-experiencing a dream. Like I said, the Switch remake is the most convenient one you can get, but I think the DX version is the one you should go out of your way to experience. I don't dislike the remake, I just think DX is closest to the developer's vision. Either way, whatever version you enjoy, Link's Awakening will always be a timeless game. That's all I have to say on Link's Awakening and The Legend of Zelda. Doing this retrospective on one of my favorite franchises has taught me a lot. It made me more introspective, asking myself why I love the Zelda series so much, looking at the pieces and coming to the conclusions I came to. If anything, this retrospective only reinforced my love for the Zelda series. There really is no other series like The Legend of Zelda. To me, it just hits the perfect sweet spot, and I can name only a handful of series that get very close. I think it has to do with the sense of adventure. Embarking on a journey, exploring dungeons, wielding a legendary sword, saving a princess, and more are why I love The Legend of Zelda. In a perfect world, I would just do the rest of the series, and one day I will return to The Legend of Zelda with Ocarina of Time. But for now, life goes on. I hope you enjoyed watching this retrospective as I enjoyed making it, and I look forward to the day I return to The Legend of Zelda. So all I can say is, thank you for watching, and take care.